Hello, I'm Robert Priest at Art Design Cafe. Now we're on to the third informal brief regarding Emily Hall Tremaine's 1930s. This one deals with the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha and Emily Hall Tremaine, an event. It's the most difficult for me, and you'll learn why at the end of this audio section. We must get the facts right, I hope as soon as possible. Get ready for a shock if you don't know about the Duke. On the screen are two photos, which will be up the entire brief. So after viewing them, feel free to minimize and just listen. On the left is Emily, and on the right is someone to think about throughout the talk. What did he know, and when did he know it? He's the then famous Ellis M. Zacharias of U.S. Naval Intelligence for Southern California, a Jewish-American hero, here photographed after the war, presumably a publicity photo for his Secret Missions radio program. He earlier published a book after the war, also called Secret Missions, related to activity before and maybe during World War II. I forgot. Like the previous briefs, if I'm specific with sources, that's solid. And if I say especially I recall, consider that a lead. The point of this is to help the Emily and associated discourses get going on this topic faster. If I do a formal presentation now, I've got to spend hours fact-checking, etc., and a lot more research. So it's about getting key information out so others can maybe more quickly also engage in this developing discourse, enable new finds, source connections, etc. This brief is relevant to the following historical figures. Emily Hall Tremaine, 1908 to 1987. Previously, Emily Spreckels, that's 1939 to 45. Also, Adolph B. Spreckels Jr., who was her second husband. A little bit about his mother, the San Francisco philanthropist Alma Spreckels. Emily's presumably best friend at that time, silent film actress Elsa Temery. Her real names were Elsa Klecker and Elsa Chancellor. With this, it is relevant to her husband, Philip Chancellor. Keep in mind, he apparently was in the Navy Reserve, and in World War II, unconfirmed, was in naval intelligence. I looked through some of the Navy books and I couldn't find him. So, but his connection would be very interesting to find out what he did and when. I suggest, if it's relevant to you, depending on your interest, to listen to the previous audios. The first one is a 13-minute narrative, if you will, and then 15-minute discussions. That's sort of an umbrella, and it's called Nazis in California, Emily Hall Tremaine Fights Back, 1933 to 45. You'll hear this event with the Duke as mentioned, which took place in April 1940 when the U.S. was still neutral in the European War for another 20 months. Emily was based in Santa Barbara and Montecito, which is next to Santa Barbara, and often was in Los Angeles. The second audio focuses on Elsa Temery, Elsa Chancellor, and Emily Hall Tremaine into the extortion trial of Leopold McLaughlin and the allegation he planned to use the money to fund assassinations of prominent Hollywood Jews. It's not clear if they knew that, but they're right next to it. And if anyone pulls the court record, it may be in there. That's covered in Hitler in Los Angeles, a key chapter in that book. This talk also, or this section with the Duke, also involves Georg Gissling, also in Hitler in Los Angeles, who we find out in some way was a double agent for U.S. military. We've only known this since 2017. This event also involves the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha and the then Nazi German ambassador to the United States and his wife. It also involves, to some degree, the famous Ellis M. Zacharias. At some point, head of Southern California Naval Intelligence, he sent his intelligence to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director, and Emily's brother-in-law, J. Bennett Noble, worked directly for him for a time on the ship, was around him. They're socializing afterwards. Um, the whole naval intelligence, who worked there, when exactly, what were they doing, is not. I haven't seen anything on that. So that's kind of a key issue for that. And also, it involves Jane Bennett's wife, who's Emily's sister, Jane Noble. At this time, this is generally speaking, not specific, but I believe Ellis talks about it, or there's something from that period where because they had this threat and they were understaffed, the wives were spying. That was kind of what they did. Going to, large events, people watching, and in Ellis's book, Secret Missions, he talks in some detail about that, and it's fascinating. The little things they could take away from just watching someone. This audio also conceivably relates to the intelligence effort leading up to the attack on Pearl Harbor, as the Duke came from Japan, and after the event goes back to Japan. He went from Germany to Japan through Russia, because in April 1940 they couldn't cross the Atlantic for that. This audio also involves the history of the formation of the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, which you'll learn about in a minute. I'm going to go backwards in history a bit because the allegations about the Duke are so disturbing, or I find so disturbing, which I'll put forth at the end. I'm thinking of Emily's art design crowd, which is where I was rooted before diving into Nazis in California intensively 4 years ago. The people that are into Nazi history or World War II history, it probably won't shock you, but for people that aren't so familiar with that, the ins and outs of it, it can be a shock. So we're going to start in June 1941. The Santa Barbara Museum has opened. The key speech was against Hitler, how art was a force for good against Hitler. And the speech was also broadcast on the local radio. Now, Emily was a key player in the formation of the museum. It had been going on, I recall, for roughly a year, many months, to convert the old post office into an art museum. The page in the Santa Barbara newspaper has a big, bold headline, and I'll read it out. This was just digitized last year. So this is how recent this history is known. So it's June 6, 1941, in bold across the entire page. Hitler threatens Soviet blow, report. Underneath, we see a smaller headline, but across maybe maybe 4 columns wide. Brilliant assembly attends presentation of Santa Barbara's new Museum of Art. And you see a photograph of 100 people, 50. It's full, and I think they're in the central courtyard for that. They're well dressed, and they're all, they're there. And remember that the main speech was against Hitler, how art was a force for good against Hitler, and it was a big event in Santa Barbara on that day. So Emily agreed to sponsor one of the named galleries, the von Romberg Gallery, in honor of her first husband, Max von Romberg, who died almost 3 years earlier to the day of his death in a suspicious plane crash. I say suspicious, and I should because you'll see other sources. He was flying from New York to Red Bank, New Jersey, which is known for massive fog. So it was foggy on that day. So, but note, he was an experienced flyer. He had some minor crashes before, but he got out of the plane, all that other stuff. But there were mixed reports on the ground. So to really look at this, you've got to look at the full range of reporting of that. And you also have to trace the statements of investigations from local to state level. And look further, because there was discussion for a couple of months about this crash. and concern about what the cause was. And then I went to the New Jersey State Library. They didn't have that, but I was told, oh, but the commissioner, we don't have that, but would you like to see his poetry? I literally was told that. So was this guy skilled, frankly? Was he a figurehead, a social person who had this? I don't know. They didn't have it. Apparently, it could have been sent to the developing new federal agency. I made contact by email or something, didn't hear anything, so it could be there. There's an issue because there's a lot of Nazi agent activity, and Max may have been on the way out, which kind of, if things are beginning to connect, would kind of make sense. So a portrait of Max was hung in the gallery. So it's kind of a tribute to Max. So that's June 1941. All right? And wouldn't we, these people in that are around this, wouldn't, they knew what was going on too, a lot more than we did. And these Nazi, anti-Nazi things going on, and also the difference between what you read in the newspaper and what's happening, which I think a number of people can relate to that gap. Now, around this time, in or after the Pearl Harbor attack, Ellis Zacharias and his wife Claire, Ellis is Jewish. Claire, I was told, was not Jewish, because I know some people that are into Ellis. They are in Santa Barbara staying with Emily's sister, Jane Noble, and her brother-in-law, J. Bennett Noble, at Emily's mother's estate in Montecito. And they're in the papers. Ellis and Claire are in the paper in small group gatherings, including Emily. And then also separately, Philip and Elsa Chancellor are with Claire Zacharias, or sometimes Jane and Bennett Noble. So they all kind of know what's maybe going on with these things that we don't. For that. And hopefully digging up maybe letters out of different people's archives, if they look up them, but especially the different kinds of intelligence, and the not always directly on the person, but something else, can tell us more of what was happening. So this is very interesting with Ellis and Claire, because if you listen, let me just read my notes here. This is interesting because this is June 1941, all right? And Emily has just stepped out of months of scandal where she called her second husband, Adolph B. Spreckels Jr., after a year of marriage, that he was pro-Nazi for this. That was in September 1940. And then in December, he turns around and says, I'm not the Nazi, she is, and rolls out this string of allegations. And yet, Ellis and Claire are publicly around Emily, which would be shocking. People knew who Ellis Zacharias was. He was in the paper, with what he did. And he testified, and that was in Washington about Nazi threats, and that also was in the paper. So just as a side note, with that, Emily stated later that she and Adolph, while she dismissed the case, that they didn't get back together, nor they didn't live together afterwards at that time. He finally let her divorce him right after the Yalta Conference at the end of the war, on her third attempt. So the only thing I can think of which might cause that is spousal privilege. If Emily, now, and let's say it were reversed. Let's say Emily were dodgy and Adolph was the innocent or something, and they divorced, and let's say spousal privilege, if that was an issue, went away. Well, Adolph would then be questioned on Emily. So, there's more to it for that. I pulled or requested FBI reports on Emily and Adolph, and nothing. They both don't have reports apparently. Now, okay. So the museum development news was literally on papers on one page in Santa Barbara, and then sometimes on another page, maybe even the same day or a couple days later. Then there's the developments of this shocking divorce case. So I'm going on a hunch here, and remember, it's a hunch. It could be anything. Is that she dismissed the case in April 1941, so she could focus on and the media could focus on the museum project. The opening was almost to the day that Max died, 3 years earlier for that. Plus, also, there was a problem with the case because there was the issue about Nazism being a point for divorce, when there was also severe alleged spousal violence, which was certainly enough then. I'm saying that in relation to other cases I've seen reported. So in recap, let's go through this timeline. So June 1938, Max dies in the plane crash. August 1939, Emily marries Spreckels. September 1940, Emily starts a divorce action and says Spreckels is pro-Nazi. December 1940, Adolf says he's not the Nazi, Emily is the Nazi, and mentions she held an event for the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. It had been mentioned briefly, I recall, in the Santa Barbara paper and the Los Angeles paper when it happened in April 1940. We'll maybe talk more about that later. April 1941, Emily dismisses the court action. June 1941, the museum opens with the speech against Hitler and portrait of Max inside the von Romberg Gallery. And afterwards, we see Ellis, Zacharias, and Claire publicly in the paper with Emily. So a bit going on here, and you might want to go back and listen to the earlier part of this audio. So one of the allegations by Spreckels against Emily was that she hosted an event at her villa for the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in April 1940, and she also arranged a garden tour. He liked gardens, and Montecito was famous for them. The Duke was the grandson of Queen Victoria, who moved to Germany and became an ally to Hitler and head of the German Red Cross. And he was touring the U.S. via Japan. He went from Germany to Japan via Russia, and he was in social gatherings meeting various people, including socialites, businessmen, a U.S. Senator, Roosevelt, and the mayor of Cleveland, and a lot more. There's a newspaper trail across the country for that, which I may get into later. And he was put forth as a British royal, and oh, by the way, ally to Hitler. Many events across the U.S. took place in posh hotels. This was the time. The U.S. was neutral before in the European War. The Duke also attended a Red Cross convention of sorts in Cleveland. So the key questions, Emily's event was at her villa in Montecito. The key questions are, why did Emily host this event? Who was there? Who arranged it? Were there spying elements? Are those attending pro-Nazi? Are they opportunists? Are they complicit? Or are they informal spies? So in this brief, moving on to part 2, I'll share with you what I have found, including Emily's secret deposition that I unearthed, which was in the court record. Emily was 31 at the time. Remember, U.S. naval intelligence is publicly in the papers with Emily and her family after the craziness. In small social gatherings, including Jewish refugees, her friends, since 1939. They were from the Netherlands. The man literally worked down the street where I live today. I found this out, this bit. That was last year. Also with the gatherings included a retired colonel that I recall worked in China, and an advisor to 1940 presidential candidate Wendell Willkie, who was advocating for more intervention in Europe, and Emily publicly supported the Wilkie campaign. The public knew full well Adolph B. Spreckels Jr. had alleged that Emily was pro-Nazi. It was all over the newspapers around 10 December 1940 in a huge media wave with photos. Remember the Santa Barbara Museum of Art opening soon after the allegations against Emily took place. What were these people thinking? Did they know more of what was going on? Was Emily involved in did she have an anti-Nazi stance for this? And remember, all of these people knew a lot more about the situation than we do today. And I will play the 90-second intro to a documentary online on YouTube that I heard about 4 years ago after the divorce case allegations resurfaced in 2019 in a book. The first time I had heard of the allegations, and also when I first took the pro-Nazi allegations against Emily seriously. I had been focusing on Emily's post-World War II work for then about 3 to 4 years. That was 2020, just before the coronavirus hit. I didn't know anything really about Emily's 1930s or what to make of it, just that it needed more research, from what was put forth in the 2001 biography. That was many 4,000 sources ago, my looking into Emily's 1930s. Imagine what all of the people that were decent, who met the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, thought after World War II, what they thought after World War II, hearing the following about him. Reported at times to be a very charming man. Just search his name on YouTube. And if you will, imagine what I thought without knowing about the U.S. Naval Intelligence angle, without knowing Georg Gissling, who partly arranged the event, was to some extent a double agent to U.S. military, and not knowing about the celebratory Santa Barbara Museum of Art opening in June 1941 with its speech against Hitler. So, who was the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha? Who was the man that Emily held an event for in her house among socialites across the United States? I will now point you to what I saw with those questions. It's on YouTube. It's called The Disturbing Story of the Nazi Royal from the Real Royalty Program. It will be on the end screen here of this audio video, and you can link to it. I stopped after 90 seconds. I suggest you do too. I will meet you on in the part 2 after you see that.